Lloyd Russell-Moyle.
Thank you, Madam Deputy Speaker. As this is now going to be one of the last debates that Parliament have before recess, I think it's important to put on the record my thanks to the leader of my party, who therefore will be the last day here in Parliament. I do think it's a shame that the parliamentary authorities haven't managed to get their act together to organise electronic, online continuation of proceedings, even through what would have been normally a recess. In normal times, under a crisis, we would be recalled, and so therefore this is a crisis. We should be able to continue our work, and asking for it to continue under correspondence I don't think is a satisfactory answer from the ministers. But I actually think it's not the ministers here that need to step up. It is the parliamentary authorities, it is the Speaker's office and IT, and if they're having problems, I'm sure we can find people who can fix this for them. I think this is important to press, and I think colleagues who dismiss it need to have a look at themselves. What I do also want to say is that myself, to some extent, I am lucky. I was ill. I got the virus. I was ill for 5-6 days of a horrible fever, very unpleasant fever, aches and pains like you get when you have the flu. And then it disappeared. It went. And that's what would happen to most people. And in that period of time, I didn't have to worry about whether I would be on sick pay if I was then to spend another week and a half, as I did in self-isolation, to make sure it all fully had gone through my system and the doctor's advice was followed. I knew that I would be paid full wages. But the problem is, many people will not be paid full wages in that period. They will be paid statutory sick pay. And statutory sick pay, for large numbers of people, mean absolute ruin. They mean ruin because they won't be able to afford to pay their rent or mortgages properly, they won't be able to eat or live properly, and they may have to borrow from other people or potentially the banks. And when they get out of this crisis, and if they are able to work again, they will struggle for many months and maybe many years, because this will have a long scarring effect for many of those people in their well-being. And we need to do something to be able to support those people on sick pay. It's very clear. The Minister has said, the Health Secretary has said himself that he would struggle to live of this level and pay. And Australia, I note already, has raised by 3 times the amount of statutory sick pay that they offer during this period. I think it is time that we do something similar. And I think it is time we do something similar quickly. I think we should have always done it. I think we should have had a sick pay system that was based on contribution and that was based, therefore, on a percentage of earnings. I think we should have always had that. But now this is the time to do it. I do want to touch upon a problem that many and some workers have with the 80% pay versus sick pay. For many workers, it will be more advantageous for them to take the 80% pay that the government is potentially offering them and to be furlonged, or whatever the phrase is, to be suspended in that period. But some employers are not offering that. Some employers of my constituents who have contacted me in airlines, for example, are just offering less work. They're offering less work that might be even 10 or 20% the amount of work that that employer would normally get. And therefore that employer is receiving far less wages than they normally would do, because they are on a retention contract or a 0 hours contract or a minimum hours contract or whatever you wish to call it. And they don't have the option of being put onto the government scheme. That needs to be resolved. And it needs to be resolved, I would suggest, by quite easily looking to see what the pay was last month of those workers. And if they are on the PAYE system, that is known already by the government. and to allow companies to put them on the government scheme and to have a variation if they need some workers to come in. Because at the moment, the bar for any work to be done, if you're on the 80% scheme, means that many companies are avoiding putting some of their employees on that, and that needs to change. We also know that many people will struggle to pay rent in this period. And I mentioned this earlier on, but there is a real problem with some of the mortgage lenders. And my understanding is, and I have done this myself, in declaration of interest, I have a buy-to-rent house that I rent out, and immediately the two people that I rent out to, one of them works in a theatre and one of them produces circus equipment. You can imagine their work has ended. So I immediately rang up my mortgage provider and I said, what are the arrangements for suspending those mortgage payments, not on my house, on the house that is a rent to buy, so that I can pass that directly straight on to the tenants. That's what I think every landlord should be doing if tenants are not able to pay. The mortgage company said, well, because your wage is not directly affected by this, we expect the mortgage to continue to be paid. We can offer you a 3-month holiday, but after the 3 months you'll be expected to make up every single penny that you haven't paid in that 3-month period. Now, look, I can probably do that, and I have made sure that my tenants have been given a reduced rent this month when they've still got some ability to pay, and for future they will be able to be there as long as they need to be. But many landlords are not in such a circumstance to be able to do that, and if they are not able to get a proper holiday, and that means just pushing the mortgage back, suspending everything in stasis, pushing it back. Your mortgage might then end 6 months later than it had planned to end, but that is the relief that is needed, not being told that interest will be accrued on the mortgage and you'll have to pay the increase back, because many landlords, large number of landlords, will just pass that on to renters. And what that will mean is they will be forced to self-evict effectively. We know that eviction prevention measures doesn't necessarily prevent evictions. We of course know the Rackmans of this world will find other ways of squeezing tenants out. But during this period also we need to be aware of the condition of rented property. Many people live in damp, squalid and poor conditions. They survive because they don't spend much time in their house. They survive by only sleeping in the damp bedroom, but they get out to the fresh air. And there is a real problem now that if they demand those improvements on landlords, and landlords are unable to make those improvements, they will have to live in squalid accommodation for months on end. That will harm their health and may even exacerbate the health crisis that we have. And if they make demands, there's also a danger of revenge evictions after this crisis is over. The whole issue of housing needs to be reviewed, and needs to be reviewed urgently. Otherwise, we are building up a crisis for ourselves. I want to touch quickly upon universal credit and disability benefit appeals. I have a number of constituents who have had their disability benefit reviewed and downgraded. In normal times, my office or one of the other disability advice offices in the constituency would help them put an appeal in. When we put appeals in, we know that there is a very high chance of success, and a high chance of success of it being backdated. We have been told that appeals are now suspended for the period, and there is a real problem that if no appeals will take place, people will be waiting long periods, and it will be harder potentially to backdate, because it's almost impossible to backdate beyond the period in which you started the appeal. So sometimes you can, if you started the appeal, you can make the argument. The government needs to, in my view, anyone that has been recently downgraded and has put a paper appeal in, the government should continue the higher rate until that appeal is processed, so no one goes disadvantaged. If they don't do that, we might find many people who actually deserve that money, in hindsight, are never able to get it, or they get themselves into a spiral of debt, having to survive in the meantime, and that is not good enough either. We have heard a lot about self-employed people, but I would like to add my thoughts, and I will finish on this. Tony, who lives in Saltdean, contacted me. he said he is a CIS self-employed builder, so he's part of the industry scheme. He says that currently he has been told by the NHS that he is high-risk vulnerable. He is on some medication and has some underlying conditions, but is actually fit and healthy in every other part of his life. Because he's self-employed, he now looks that he will get the statutory sick pay, which will not even cover his outgoings. He has a mortgage that will offer some support, but not a complete support. And he says, lots of the lads at the site, including mine, are now looking like our families could starve if we don't get money. Please, don't let Tony's family starve. Please, can we get something that is fair? My view is universal basic income would have done that. It would have been simpler. It would have been easier. It would have been quicker. The government has the details of most people's bank accounts linked to their national insurance number, either through benefit systems, either through a PAY system, either through the self-assessment tax system, or through the pension system. A universal basic income paid to everyone immediately and then clawed back through a proper progressive taxation system at the end of the year would have allowed all the government's fears about people who are still earning at the end of the year, when their self-assessments are due or when general tax is due, they would be clawed back, and it would have been fair. Instead, the government has gone about this very complex system of mortgage relief, rent relief, 80% here, blah, 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 blah there, and it is extremely confusing and it is extremely scary for self-employed people. So I look forward to Thursday having a chance to look at that, but I do wish the government had acted quicker and had acted more decisively on something like universal basic income. Thank you, Madam Speaker. Deputy.
Chris Stevens.